Folks, did you really think you'd have to wait another minute? Of course not. Would never do that to you. There's too much going on today. There's too much that we have to say. Timer is dead. Long live Matthew and me. As you can see, I'm here today with Matthew, and I'm gonna mispronounce it. Clohessy, who is
nailed it.
Perfect. I'm an expert in pronouncing names, by the way. Certified now. He is here, and he's a CK3 programmer. I am in this spot as a content creator where I am, of course, coming from the community. I have been for years, since Hearts of Iron 2, playing the games that are Grand Strategy, that Paradox in particular has been making. And now as a content creator, I'm like sort of in that community still, but I also have a bit of a gateway, I think, to the development teams. And I always found it interesting to take a look at, the video game industry, at an industry that isn't all that transparent, and maybe make it so that more people can, see more details of it. That's why you're here, Matthew. I'm gonna bombard you with questions today. If anybody in chat has any meaningful, interesting questions, then feel free to ask them. If they're bad, then I will fry you on air. I will definitely sort that out. But for the moment, Matt, how are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm definitely excited to be here. I mean, I agree with you a lot of the fact that the games industry is as a whole sort of a black box of its own. And even before I sort of went into it, I didn't really know how any of it kind of worked, and it doesn't really help with being understandable and approachable and people knowing what goes into the games they like when everyone sits there scared and doesn't say anything. So it's nice to get a chance to sort of talk a bit about it and have some fun whilst doing so.
Happy to have you here. Speaking of fun, what we're going to do today is we're going to go and play some CK3. I am half done, which is the amazing ruler right here in Jorvik, and Matt is over in Sudreya. I also do want to take a moment to call out Trinex. Trinex, you're a mod in the channel. I just saw that you subscribed just now. What happened there, huh? How did that go down? But what we're going to do is, while we talk, while we have a conversation, we're going to be playing on speed 3, no pausing. If things go horribly, horribly wrong, then they go horribly, horribly wrong. Yeah, so let's unpause, and my first question is, Matt, how are you, and who are you? More importantly, what do you do? Where do you come from? Where do you go?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good today. Had a nice bit of a relaxing weekend. I am one of the programmers on CK3. Originally, I'm from England. I moved to Stockholm about 4 years ago now.
Do you speak any Swedish?
Enough to be embarrassing and vaguely get by, but not enough to be remotely good. So, kind of par for the course for Brits living anywhere, basically. But I've been on CK3 now for 2.5 years. When I first moved here, I started as a content designer, and I was working on Crusader Kings 2's Jade Dragon expansion for a few months before I then moved on to what I can now actually say was Victoria 3, as opposed to when I was just ethereally working on something until I was on the Crusader Kings 3 team. And I worked a little bit on Imperator for a tiny amount and another unannounced project before, ending up back home with the sequel to one of my favorite games. So I was definitely happy to end up here by the end of it.
Another unannounced game. Now, I gotta ask you, because you weren't always, or rather, you started out in a different section of the Grand Strategy community. You were a modder. What was what did you do as a modder? Maybe people have heard. It's a little known mod, but maybe they've heard of it.
Yeah. So I worked on the Crusader Kings 2's Game of Thrones mod, and that was basically my CV to get a job. Was just taking a link to that and going to the content design manager at the time and the HR lead, Martin, just please give me a job when the sort of job application opened up on the site for a content designer. And I'd worked on that since 2013 or 2014 up until I moved to Sweden in about 2017. So worked on it for a good 3 or so years along with variety of other people, but primarily one of the mod lead, Nucky, who was absolutely fantastic. And I mean, I pretty much, to a large part, owe the starting of my career to that little mod I made in my spare time, along with a wonderful, fun community about it, and learning the mysterious ways of grand strategy games.
Now, starting out as a mod, I mean, I talked to so many modders. I mean, the CK3 community is just an insanely huge place. It's really difficult to describe for me because people don't understand that I'm legitimately sitting in 65 Discords and like I'm looking through what they're doing, what sort of mod projects are going on. It's a lot to keep track of, and there is an incredible amount to keep track of. But what made you essentially say, hey, I would like to you know, work in the games industry itself?
I mean, for me at the time, you know, I started modding when, like, as many people do, and I think people don't realize that, you know, when I was a teenager, right? I was at high school, and you know, at the time, I was coming into my last few years of high school, and I was looking at universities and those sort of things, and I mean, none of them were really appealing to what I really wanted to do. As with most people, I didn't really know what I wanted to do that much. I just was gonna go study some like finance and maths degree because I was like, oh, that'll get me a good enough job. And
business.
my dad works in finance, so I vaguely know what it's about. And then I saw the like job ad go up for content designer on. I don't think it's actually, I'm not sure if it's mentioned specific job, but just content designer at Paradox. And I was like, well, it says that this is like the skill sets to a degree that you get from like the mods and stuff. It's the same scripting language, the same idea of like writing all these events and stuff. And I was like, why don't I just give it a shot? I mean, like, what's the worst that could happen? You know, worst case, they could just say no, and I'd be like, whatever, I'll just continue with my existing plans. But, you know, if I do get a chance to work there, then even if it's just for a brief amount of time, that seems like it would be really fun and interesting. And then I did a sort of 2-month contract on CK2
as a content designer.
As a content designer, where I did a variety of stuff with J Dragon before then moving over to Victoria 3. And then after that, I wanted to become a programmer. I'd always enjoyed the more technical side of like the scripting as opposed to just, you know, the narrative writing. So I started learning C++ because that's what we use for pretty much all of our code at Paradox.
Is this because like it's a pretty big jump, right? To go from the Paradox language, you know, I see like I know a lot of people that are like, oh, this is not a real coding language, and obviously I don't understand a thing about coding, so I don't have any opinion on that. But it's a pretty big jump still, right? Is it a self-learned thing, or is it a thing where you went to university or got like an associate's degree or something?
So it was self-learned, but with, you know, the guidance and aid of online resources and, you know, my coworkers at the company. You know, my tech lead at the time, especially when I was on Victoria 3, was, you know, indispensable to really, you know, getting me up and backing me in this sort of
don't scare me. I'm it looks like you're walking into me.
No, I'm not, I promise. I'm going to other places.
Close to a disaster, yeah. Right, so that's actually really interesting to me because, I mean, it's you know, the gaming industry is a very young industry and it is very different in terms of how people approach it. I know for a fact personally, of course, that there's a lot of people that come in from the side as well, more on the marketing side of things. I know a couple of content creators that essentially moved into marketing, not just when it comes to Paradox, but also just in general. And that you actually were able to just move from content creator to, there we go, my war is over. We're no longer enemies, and I will rip our enemy apart. Blood Eagle.
Nice.
It's an interesting step. Is that something that you think, you know, because obviously when you started back then, and even further back, like 10 years ago, it was even more different. But the longer this goes on, I would argue that the game industry sort of formalizes itself, right? Do you think this is still a thing that can be quite common, that can be witnessed quite often, or is this a bit of a different issue as the industry goes and grows further?
I think as the industry grows, you know, more and more, you'll see more and more like formalized degrees and stuff getting into it. I mean, there's already like plenty of really good universities that give degrees in either specifically, you know, game design, programming, just general, you know, like art and 2D art, 3D art. But I do think that it's still at again, in its infancy enough that you don't need to have some formal degree to be able to go into the role. I mean, or you can have some just related degree, you know. There's so many people just with a computer science degree, because again, at the end of the day, you know, for programming, right, it's all programming. Same way, you know, for art, it's all arts, it's just your end user is different. But I do think we'll probably see more of a trend towards more formalized paths as we go through. I mean, in Stockholm, actually, there is I don't know if it's a university or if it's like some like just other type of educational place called Future Games, which we often like interact with and give lectures at from, you know, real game developers. That sort of helps, you know, people get into the industry and get internships and, you know, get taught how to make games by people that have made games. Because otherwise, a lot of the issue you can get is that it's how do you teach someone how it is to make a game if they've never made a game themselves? Because there is so many, you know, moving pieces, and it's a young industry that most of that knowledge hasn't quite gotten to the point where it's commonplace taught in schools. It's definitely not taught in like high school or primary education by any means.
Now, starting from there, since you are wait, let me check real quick. I really hoped I would get Alfred himself, but I did not capture him. That's bad news for me. But yeah, no, going from the topic of, like you essentially moving around, being somebody that was able to enter the business and then change essentially what their direction was, which appears to be quite common. I see so many names that I know and that I recognize in Paradox that are sort of shifting around in the roles, going up, going sideways sometimes, just like you essentially changed your, I mean, profession is the wrong word, right? But the theme of what you were doing. Now, what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis as a programmer? When you work, like what are your tasks? What is your job? What is actually going on there?
I mean, it's there's a lot of like similar stuff that's commonplace. You have to do your estimates, your breakdowns of the features you're going to work on. You do like the very level of planning. Specifically for like programming, we're responsible. We're all pretty much on the Paradox teams, very generalist programmers. We usually, on CK3 were somewhat of an exception that we did have like a dedicated AI lead. Usually it's just one person that, or usually everyone on the team is responsible for part of the AI. Everyone on the CK3 has to do AI code, but he was very much, especially with like the foundations and the war AI and how we'd deal with all of these different issues and like planning it out very strongly from the get-go, as opposed to it being a fully team effort. So there's a lot on there, but otherwise we really just do everything, right? I work on the gameplay features, I do the UI and UX, performance, different platform supports, build systems supports. We have like a dedicated build and engine team, of course, but we still have to sync with them, and we add code to our engine all the time. So it's really a bit of everything, which is good. It allows you to, if you want to specialize a bit more, we do have people that do that. We have some people that get more into like the graphics programming and stuff. But personally, I just like making features and making things go fast.
Right. Now, that is actually something I also wanted to bring up. In that work, when anybody really that is not just in the gaming industry, but generally doesn't deal with programmers, the most that I see is on Reddit are programmer humor, which is just like, look at my boss telling me that I need to code I don't know, 3 million pages website in 5 minutes, basically. But that's the only thing that we get to see of that, I think. That sort of glimpse where it's like programmer is being told what to do and then does that. What is the atmosphere like in game design? Because in game design, it does seem at the very least from the outside a bit more involved, or rather, as that it would be a bit more involved. Is that the case, or is it essentially somebody comes up as a content designer and says, "I would like to do this"? What can you do?
It does depend on the company, right? Mainly the size of the company, which is one of the things of why we're all like fairly generalist to an extent on our teams, is because we're not like Ubisoft or DICE or something where the number of programmers in any given Paradox game would be around at its smallest for the smaller projects, very small DLCs, 4 or 5. I think the highest
Northern
on
Lords, for example?
CK3. Northern Lords was probably only 1 or 2 full-time on it,
Ewan, right?
if even that, I think,
Ewan
because Ewan did a lot of the content design work and a lot of artwork, but from the code side, it was very limited.
He did the
features.
artwork as well?
Well, he didn't do the artwork. There's a whole art department that does all that. Ewan was doing the content mostly. So we have like a full art department and stuff. But for the programmers, most of us were working on Northern Lords or the Royal Court during the time of Northern Lords. So there was only a little bit of programming resources there. But I think at its largest, the CK3 programming team was like 13 or 15 people, which is why I say we all fairly do a bit of everything. We're not like Ubisoft where we've got like 40 studios with hundreds of programmers working on everything. But the upside of that is that you do get to be a lot more directly involved in the design of things. Whenever there's a feature, when it comes up, I talk with our content designers, our game designer, or our game director, and we give input on how best it would be doable. What could we change to either make the code solution easier, or what could we gain from a mildly more complicated thing that would have a lot of bang for buck in terms of like satisfaction of the design. So we're very like involved in the design of things as well, which is really nice. I still like, even though I stopped being a content designer, I still do enjoy a lot the whole design aspect of things. I've got my own hot takes on how video games should be played and what a our strategy game should be like. So
Do you have a hot take for me right now? Just like, what's your most hot take you can deliver?
My most hot, I don't think I've got one off the cuff, but you know, with like every feature of CK, you know,
Yeah.
I can sit down and chat design for people with, you know, forever, you know, where they're like, well, why did you do this instead of that, or why didn't you include this feature from CK2? And you know, we've got the ability to sort of talk about that because we're all pretty big fans of the game itself. So we have our own strong opinions on what we like about it and what we're looking at out of it as a sort of strategy / RPG game.
Speaking, that is one of those things as well with the different features and the implementations. This question was in chat as well with Andofrin, and I think Andofrin had a look at my question document. Now, when it comes to feature design, especially, I mean, that's a whole nother topic, but when it comes to the longer development cycles that CK3 has just in general compared to, for example, CK2, except at the end there, I guess CK2 had the very long time with Holy Fury and what's the other one? Iron Sentry. But in general, when you have a feature, let's say, for example, like the religions in CK3, that is a very complex feature that goes into everything. Where does it start and where does it finish? Is there like a general process that you could describe when it comes to how a feature arises and how it is slowly but surely implemented?
Yeah, so like at the beginning level, you know, our game designer and game director have, you know, they've got a, you know, ideas are cheap is what I think Shams likes to say, like VP of something fancy. I don't remember his job title any longer.
VP of
you know, ideas
basically.
are cheap. It's the implementation that's expensive. So our game designers have a million ideas, and then it sort of comes from them talking with each other of, you know, what do we actually want to work on, especially when it comes to focusing on the brand, like a brand new game. There's a lot of design discussion that goes on before you even get like any programmers or any developers on the project, right? Anyone making stuff. It's a lot of discussion about what do we want different. If it's a sequel, if it's a brand new game like, say, Stellaris was at the time, then they would have had their own discussions of what do we want that sets this apart, because we don't want to just cookie cutter every game. Otherwise, you know, they would all end up very similar to like EU 3 and 4, which is like the sort of quote-unquote core of the grand strategy in it for a lot of people. You know, whether you like that design or not, right?
No, I know.
And you know, whereas something like Stellaris is, you know, more of a 4X, and then the sci-fi atmosphere you can do with the sort of newly generated lands every time. CK3 and CK2 was the more role-playing aspect. Hoi is more the war game sim, and each of them come with their own, you know, unique selling point. We don't just want to do a rebranded. Like, you don't just want to do like CK2 in space or CK2 in, like, you know, the Victorian era. Like, everything's got to be their own unique one. So there's a lot of talks like that, and then that sort of goes into just general designs. We get this big grand design document usually that is, especially for base games, hundreds of pages long, that contains sort of the designs and interactions of pretty much everything. Then we have our UX designers who will come up to us with, you know, UX mockups, wireframes, sort of interactive prototypes, all that sort of good stuff. And then that's sort of the point where it kind of reaches, you know, the programmers. You know, once the design is sort of finalized and the, like, how it's supposed to look and function is done, then we sort of come on and actually start implementation. You know, we have inputs as the design is happening, especially in terms of, like, you know, feasibility. You know, that was, for example, with the Royal Court, the court scene, the 3D court scene is something where it was, you know, design says we would like this. And, you know, they're not just going to come to us and say, oh, make this, because then, you know, there was a non-zero chance we would just say, yeah, no, we can't do that. So there was, you know, discussions quite early on, everyone's involved, and maybe even little bits of prototyping happening. So there's a lot of, like, it's a lot of, game development is a very iterative process, so there's a lot of, even just from, like, when the idea is first made to what it actually ends up as, there's a lot of changes to designs and to the implementations.
But at the end of the day, when it comes to stuff like the Royal Code, when it comes to the culture updates, it's really an inter-department. I assume that, like, you don't actually differentiate into departments within your section of the studio. What is it? Is it Paradox Red, I want to say? That you
yeah, so the sort of sub-studios are more of just like a high-level organization thing. We're Studio Red, which is Crusader Kings 3 and Victoria 3. And then there's Green, which is Stellaris, and Gold, which is Hoi. And within us, yes, in the teams, we don't really make much of a distinction between the different, like, departments and disciplines. Yeah, we're all kind of just working together. You know, everyone's got their own processes still. You know, the way that content design works is slightly different to us, but from, like, an overall level, it's all pretty much the same boat.
So yeah, okay, so definitely a very like interactive process with a lot of people involved. Now, let me take a look. Oh yeah, this is a question I definitely want to ask. I'm very interested in. We're gonna. There was also a question about like mods. We're gonna get to that in a bit. I think we're already 24 minutes in. Jesus Christ. Okay. And essentially, one of the questions that I have, because this is Paradox, and this is in the video games industry. And the video games industry has a bit of an, I think, a troublesome situation in certain studios when it comes to the work-life balance. Now, how is that something that you found, you know, coming completely fresh into the industry? Well, and at the same time, how do you find it in particular here in your job at Paradox?
Yeah, I mean, the work-life balance is something that's going to also like wildly vary per studio and what countries you're in. We're pretty lucky here in Sweden that as a culture it values the work-life balance pretty highly, like compared to what it could be like in England. As a studio, we also try and avoid crunch. I mean, we didn't have any like ordered overtime or crunch for the release of Crusader Kings 3. And in my 4 years now at Paradox, I've only done like 10 hours of ordered overtime, where like management is like, okay, we need to hit this deadline, we need this extra time. So we want to avoid that at all costs, because it is, I mean, like I've said this before, but it's basically, it's a failure of project management. There's no way about it. You have more work than you have time, and you can't cut anything or delay. So something's gone horribly wrong. So we do try and keep that to a minimum where we can. Every team has varying amounts of success with that, but I think by and large, Paradox is pretty good with that, especially at least in my personal experience here. So, which I'm very happy about, because I would not be massively excited to spend extra millions of hours of overtime trying to get something out, because it's very diminishing returns as well.
Right. Yeah, I hear that a lot. In particular, I mean, there are a couple of programmers and just general employees for Paradox on Twitter that are very vocal against crunch, and that essentially say that it just doesn't actually do what people think it does either when it comes to the result.
It's not gonna, people get tired, people get sloppy, people get demotivated, especially, like there's only the reason that we only did like the 10 hours of ordered overtime I had, and it was basically an extra 2 hours for 2 weeks, right? And even towards the end of that, we probably weren't getting 100% efficiency in those extra 2 hours, because people are just like, no, I just want to go home, right? I don't really want to be doing this. And especially when it becomes really long term, when it becomes sort of just about the general flow of it, which is like what people like to sometimes call like a death march of overtime. That becomes very minimum payoffs, because people are tired. They're going to introduce more bugs than they probably are fixing when they make their features. And, you'll get people stressed and burnt out faster. They'll end up on some sick leave, or they'll just quit. I mean,
it's a thing in any industry at that point. Like, crunch, obviously, it's very obvious in the gaming industry, because you can see the result quite directly. But I mean, if anybody's ever been active in retail, I think they know what it looks like to be overworked and to have not enough colleagues, etc., etc. So yeah, I think like that is something that everybody can get. I just would like to basically address a comment in the chat by Ixum. I hope we can ask questions. Otherwise, this is just corporate chilling. I gotta ask you a question. What is for you corporate chilling? Because what the point of the stream is essentially to sit down and say, hey, we want to take a look at what it's actually like to work in the games industry. If that qualifies as corporate chilling, basically everything does. And I would be rather confused if everything does, because at that point, we just can't talk to the people behind the games ever. Meaning that most of what we get, all of what we get, is just marketing speak. Matt right here is not somebody from marketing. Matt is somebody that, I mean, he does appear on streams, but still.
This is going to be the least marketing version you're going to get of anything as well, because I don't know about you, OBB, but I'm not being paid to be here. This is my weekend. I'm here because I want to, and because it's fun, and because I think it's a good idea.
See, I can actually tell you that like streams they do not make me a lot of money. I could be making a video right now, but it's more like I care about the topic. They do not make me a lot of money at all.
Yeah, I mean, I could just be playing more of Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which is what has been absorbing all my time recently. But yeah, I mean, I do get people's skepticism with it, right? You see someone from a company talking about other things. The chances of them deciding to like crap all over their company is very limited. I want to keep my job at the end of the day. Would I get fired if I shout on Paradox massively? Probably not, unless I break an NDA. It's like I'll get a stern talking to, and I won't be on many other marketing things, because they are like, okay, we can't trust you to
no, I mean,
have the
listen, the actual that's the difference though. Like the actual marketing events. Obviously, the person whose job depends on being in the marketing team isn't going to say, yeah, Matt, he's going to like basically badmouth us, so let's have him on. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but yeah, that's not what this is to like any degree. By the way, we are going to, I do want to highlight that as well, we are going to be talking about mods later on, especially with Matt literally having a background on the topic of mods, yeah. But for the moment, I would actually just like to ask one last thing when it comes to the industry, I think just in general. If you can travel or could travel back in time and you meet yourself and, you know, your old self is currently saying, man, I think I should really study business and do business things and finance things. What do you tell them about the games industry that you wish you had known beforehand?
I think that one of them is it's not as mystical and scary as it looks like it is, right? At the end of the day, it's filled with a bunch of people who are just kind of nerdy, making products, and in the same way that any business makes a product or service, you know, there's no some ethereal magic knowledge that means you have, you know, to become a gameplay programmer that's different from just being a programmer anywhere else. You know, there's maybe different care about things in terms of performance, but in the same way that anyone making any high performance software, be that like banking or whatever, you know, it's just not that mystical. You know, an artist, right? It's 3D modeling, it's 2D UIs, it's art. And I think just, yeah, if you're interested in games, you know, and you're studying a skill set that has some use in games, just don't be afraid of trying to go into that. It's not some mystic club where you need to have a special password to get in. It's just, you just apply somewhere.
Would you say people in general have too much respect? I mean, I guess it would especially come in if you're in a position...
I will never accuse people of having too much respect for game developers. Don't worry about that.
No, I mean, people that want to join, obviously.
It's more that people like oftentimes look at it as you know, being like this like weird, like different special industry sometimes, and even internally people like to see it as being a bit weird and special, and it really isn't. It's a lot more fun than a lot of jobs are. I would never like claim otherwise of that. You know, give me the choice of going and working at a bank or making video games. I know what's gonna, you know, keep me going, like in enjoyment more. But it's not something where you need to be like afraid that you haven't got the, you know, oh, I didn't study like game development at school. Most game developers didn't study game development at school because nobody really teaches it yet. So you don't, you know, if you just take the plunge and apply, there's a fair chance it pays off more than you'd expect.
All right, okay, so yeah, I see. I'm missing the English word, but in German we call people that don't, you know, that don't have a degree in it, that didn't study this, or that didn't get an apprenticeship, etc., etc. It's called Quereinsteiger, which means as much as sideways entries, because they didn't follow the red string that usually is attached to that profession. But yeah, that seems to be quite common, and I guess that, I mean, with that is quite the high possibility of also just coming imposter syndrome, right? At some point you just go, but can I really do this job? Also, I see that you like just surrounded yourself with allies, not just hanging out, huh?
Yeah, I'm just chilling, just getting my friends, you know. I mean, I know when I definitely started, I had, you know, my fair share of like, oh, you know, imposter syndrome, like, do I have the skills to do this? You know, are we okay? Well, I pressed escape and I got rid of a pop-up. But I think that it's also one of those ones where you just, like, the more you kind of do things and work in it, at least for me, a lot of the imposter syndrome went away. Because, yeah, I did come in here, I was like, oh, crap, am I going to be able to do this stuff? But there's people around you, everyone, you know, wants you to succeed and will support you, so there's no, you're not like just coming in there on your own and gonna have to like sink or swim, you know. At least at Paradox, right, we have a whole like 6-month probationary period. That's very common in Swedish companies.
Yeah,
but during that time you get a mentor or a sponsor who's gonna, you know, be there with you and guide you through things. You can go for questions. They are at the end of the day also, you know, they're evaluating you too, but if you make one mistake, it's not suddenly like you're screwed, right? It's you know, we want everyone that we hire to stay here and enjoy it. So if, you know, you feel bad after making one little mistake, then it's not going to be very good for either of us. So...
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a general thing though, and I can go back, like, not to retail but to hospitality, because like, so I did have I did work some accounting in the past, but like primarily, and nobody is surprised by my personal looks, of course, that I did that, but what I want to get at is that in particular when it comes to normal jobs, when it comes to smaller jobs, the turnover rate is already horrendous for businesses, even if they don't primarily rely on those people. So having a development team, for example, like fall apart because people aren't comfortable, I mean, I can't imagine that it's easy to go, hey, let's take a look at code that I didn't write.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, then I think people. This is what when people are like, "Oh, game, why aren't you shipping on time?" What? Is that it's not. It's as with most jobs, you can't just throw more bodies at the problem and it will solve it. The time to onboard people and get them sort of up to speed is an investment, right? So it's in your best interest to do that at good, smart intervals instead of when the project's on fire, and it's in your best interest to have them not want to leave.
Let's move on to, let's take a look. Let's see. Let's give a quick breakdown of what sort of topics I generally got coming here. There is going to be a bit more about your job and just implementing features in general. There's going to be a bit more about everything when it comes to your job and the perception publicly, and then of course there is stuff like what is considered with the update cycle with the because CK2 works, CK3 works a bit differently, and then how that interacts with the community, which, by the way, I can just say, oh, hello Feedback Gaming in chat. No, oh, Magna is also here. All right, you are now under surveillance, Matthew. Magna is making sure that you're not saying anything. No, essentially where I'm coming from is more, we're going to be taking a look at the mods without a doubt, primarily because, of course, CK3 is, I mean, that's the main thing that I do on the channel, and the relationship that exists between that and the team and people like yourself that have a background from there is going to be interesting. But let's start out by asking a question that surely won't cause a riot in chat. What are the most common misconceptions that you find people hold when you interact with them, be that in real life or be that online, about your job?
I mean, this is going to be like a small, funnier one, but a lot of people overestimate the amount of maths you need to know to be a programmer. The amount of times that people have asked me, like, "Oh, I'm not sure I could be a programmer," or "How could you be a programmer? You need so much maths." I'll say, "Not really. You need like addition and subtraction, multiplication. That's pretty much it. You can get through. Unless you're doing like 3D graphics, then you need to know a lot of stuff. I don't do that much complex math for Paradox games, despite being, it's a very intensive math game. But if you think about it, a lot of it's multiplication and addition. It's not that ludicrously complex. Unless you start doing like 3D graphs where you need like linear algebra, it's pretty fine. Which is more just like a weird, funny one, though.
Are you saying you're terrible at math? Is that what you're getting?
I mean, I'm not awful at it, but I'm definitely not great at it. Like, I definitely have had my fair share of like head scratch moments of, wait, how do I do the thing? What is these coordinates? Oh no. Like one of the bugs I had in the Royal Court, actually, when I was implementing some of the court scene stuff, was that like I got like the XYZ coordinates of something just totally wrong, and people were like flipped upside down, walking on walls. I was like, wait, I don't think this is how that works. I'll go and poke one of our other programmers who can math better than me. Be like, what did I do? And he's like, you're an idiot. Oh, okay, cool.
That's a good response.
But like, I mean, overall, like misconceptions. I mean, there's more misconceptions, I feel, of like the game industry as a whole, as like specifically programmers, because I'm fairly like,
nobody talks about programmers, is what you're saying, right?
That's the thing, is one of the upsides of being a programmer is that most people know they don't understand programming, so they don't comment on programming. No one's coming, like, unless like the game crashes, and then you can be like, oh well, that's clearly not meant to happen. But no one really knows about how it works or what I'm doing. Unlike, like artists or designers, where then everybody's got an opinion, because everyone has their own subjective opinion on if something's fun or looks good. Most people don't have a subjective opinion on if my code is good, if they can even, and it's also not something you can see. You see the end result, but you don't actually get to see how I did any of my code, much to my relief.
Right. When you come to when it comes to the game industry, then is there anything that like is on your mind that I mean, I have, of course, listen, I'm gonna nail you on quotes you made 5 months ago on your Reddit account. I have, of course, taken the liberty of going through some of the stuff that you've said recently or in recent memory at PDXCon, etc. And a big thing appears to be the idea of like feature creation of, for example. And this is a big thing, of course, and definitely not like one of those things that are comfortable to deal with. But when it comes to, for example, why is CK3 the way it is? Why, did you make the decisions to have this as the game that is released as 1.0? Because, of course, this is something that I personally have insight in as well, because I also, like, a bit of a background, just general business, essentially, in business organization. And a big topic is, without a doubt, setting deadlines, and making sure that something in a project is included. Is there anything like on that? I know I'm pushing into a direction here, but like that is, I guess, something that is read very often.
there's a lot of, people always want the most stuff in their game in the shortest amount of time for the least cost of the game, right? Which is understandable. But the one we got a lot of, especially leading up to the launch, less so now, was why is the XYZ feature from CK2 not in CK3? Or why did you change how this feature works and whatever? And usually the answer is, just shade myself a little bit more. Usually the answer is that if we did every single thing we wanted in the game, then the game would never come out. And that's not hyperbole, it would just never come out. There are some games that are stuck in early access hell. I didn't want to name it, but yeah, Star Citizen. It's a game that's been in development for years.
I mean, it's their business model. It's not like we're not painting them. That's just how they function. They just exist basically to be in early access.
Because if you think about CK2, how much time was CK2 developed for? I wasn't at the company at the time, but I would say probably a year or 2 years before the release date, probably like a year and a half for Paradox at the size then. And then it was 8 to 9 years of post-release support. So if you want everything CK2 had, with new features, with better features improved upon from CK2, with a better technical foundation, with better art assets and better designs, then if you want all of that, then that game would take probably 15 years to make. From the end of CK2 development to the release of CK3.
Yeah.
So some stuff gets cut, some stuff is cut because we just don't like it that much. There's plenty of systems from CK2 that were like not the biggest thing that anyone really cared about.
You want me to send you a list of what I dislike so that you don't do that again?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I always look at CK3 in games that are sequels. It's sort of like a case of thirds, right? It's 1/3 is the stuff that worked from the last game, 1/3 is stuff from the last game that you've improved upon, and 1/3 is brand new stuff. Because we still want CK3 to be its own unique thing. It shouldn't lose what made CK2, knowable and lovable and great, but it should still improve upon those things. And it's also not a case of just hire more people, then you can make more stuff, because again, we have to onboard everybody, and then the project won't be making money during the development, right? It's that balance of how much you think it's going to sell once it's out versus how much money will it cost to make, and that's why certain things are not in, even if we on the team as well would love them. We're doing artifacts for the 1.5 patch and a lot of stuff in Royal Court. Would we have all loved artifacts magically on day one? Yeah, sure. Would we have all loved the 3D court scene on day one? Yeah, but I mean, the 3D court scene at least wasn't even an idea remotely thought of or budgeted for release. Neither were artifacts. There were things where it was okay, if we want to do this, we want to do it in the future, we want to have a stronger foundation and a game that's going to stand on its own merits already with the new things we're adding.
That's actually, when it comes to the longer development cycle, I mean, you didn't work that long on CK2. CK2 had these very short development cycles. I actually went over it recently that, and this is more company policy than anything. I don't think that this is really your sector, but it's of course a big difference from the outside to look at a game that gets updates every 3 to 4 months or something. I went through it recently, actually, in a dev diary. I talked about the cost of CK2 that you as a consumer had when purchasing all of the DLC that came out in the first year of existence compared to what it is now. Because I personally, I'm a big fan of the new approach. I was not a big fan of the old approach. It is what it is, and I think it was also the first step. I mean, CK2 was literally the first title, right, that had this long development cycle anyway. Before that, there was Wiki 2, and I mean, all of the other games, they got 2 expansions at most. I think, did Hoi 3 get 3? I can't remember.
It was usually 2 to 3 expansions, and also at the time, the patch, you had to get the expansion, otherwise you didn't get your patch either.
Yeah.
Which was definitely not the people's most favorite thing.
Is that, how much did that, when it comes to the issue of everything related basically to the development cycle, how different is it? And again, you didn't work too much on CK2, but maybe you have some insights of your colleagues to share. And no, wait, before I ask the question, I actually want to say that Magnus said, I'm going to cut out some of the answer here. He has also written the occasional bad code. The start was, he's a very good programmer, like all good programmers. So, but I need to pit you against one another so that we have an interesting enemy dynamic there. Every good show needs that. But essentially my question is, from an outsider perspective, I obviously have a very strong opinion on the long-term development cycle and how it is structured. But what does that look like from the inside? Does it change how the team approaches things? Does it change how the projects are approached, etc.?
I mean, it definitely changes how things are approached, you know, because you can get a lot more of an iterative, like, build on things. You know, you can start with, you know, you can split your things from, like, what's the functional pass, what's the, you know, minimum viable product, and then, you know, polish an iteration on top of that. So I mean, for CK2, like, it was never anticipated when CK2 was made that it would last for 8 years. The expectation when it was made, like this is me said on like CK2 anniversary streams by the directors as well, is that it would last for 2 or 3 expansions, maybe, you know, a few years. It was never anticipated it would last for 8, and it was sort of one of those things where, like, during the course of CK2's life, it had like 3 or 4 different times where it was like, oh no, this is definitely the last expansion. Because yeah, it was never a thought that it would go on as long as it did.
And now it's different. Now it's planned from the start, basically, right? So it's
yeah,
a different
now
outlook.
we know with all of our games that they are going to last for quite a long time, and that we need to make sure that we have the ability to have that like technical foundation and ability to sort of overhaul things over time, and we need to have better support for what's going to be patch and DLC and for all those sorts of things, and how we make the expansions. You know, as you said, we want to have some of the ones that are bigger, longer term things. Holy Fury was sort of one of those first ones where it was a very longer development cycle, and part of why that was more doable is because it was, you know, CK2 was at end of life by that point, right? And it was known that that was going to basically have to be the actually real last one, because otherwise then CK3 was coming out.
It was already in development,
afterwards.
yeah. Right.
So it was like, we know that this is the final one. And then they, you know, the product owner fought hard to get, you know, that longer cycle, and, you know, it paid off. You know, Holy Fury was one of CK2's, you know, best and most loved expansions. And I think it's something that, at least on the CK3 team, we also recognize, and that's part of why we want to do these longer development cycles, and we can have smaller patches or content packs, flavor packs in between, but for the actual big mechanical things, we're at least aiming, you know, and hopefully it continues to work out as we'd like dream for it to, that we can have those as longer development cycles.
There's a question in chat. I saw that earlier and I had to scroll up very far. How do you balance building new features versus fixing technical debt? Is there a specific process, or is it up to the dev team to take the appropriate time? And before you answer, I just want to bring up that it is also an interesting question to me, because Stellaris just had this big announcement, right? Where they essentially said that there is going to be a team split where half of the team work, or a part of the team, I don't know whether it's half, works on basically old content and fleshing that out more, adding more features, changing features around and where they're allocated and how they interact. And then the other half will work on the new content. Is that different, you know, in CK3? Like, how is it approached in general when it comes to looking backwards and having to deal with code that already exists?
I mean, we have a big spreadsheet and like task list of tech debt tasks, and we, you know, periodically through all of the development cycles for, you know, like for all courts and stuff, we get some time to fix some of these things. And, you know, if some of them are higher priority, then we'll just do them straight up. We always have, you know, bug fixes. You know, we have like, this is getting more into like the way that companies call things. We operate on what's called like a sprint, which is for us 3 weeks, 2 weeks of feature development, 1 week of fixing stuff. And you then, so yeah, there's always at least, you know, a week in those given time spans where you're just going through the bug database and fixing stuff. And depending on how features are going, some people will do more bug fixes outside of that as well. And especially once you do like your feature lockdown, everyone was just doing bug fixes and polish. I mean, I think for the release of CK3, we had like the core thing locked down pretty decently in advance. I don't remember any actual dates. And then we were doing just months of bug fixing, and a lot of that is what then became the sort of hot fixes if needed, which we didn't need too much of for the release, and then more so for the 1.1 patch. So it was just a lot of just churning through bugs where it's like, okay, you know, what's like, if it's a game crash, yeah, we really need to do that ASAP. If it's like, oh, this piece of localized text in this obscure menu is wrong, okay, we can do that later.
All right.
But I mean, we're always looking for trying to make sure we have the best tech and reducing our tech debt, because, you know, especially, you know, programmers get annoyed about it much more than everyone else does, because we have to see the bad code as well as playing with it.
Right. It's a let's do a bit of a topic change. I think we will be coming back to the topic of the internal process and how it all works. But let's actually move on to mods, because I realized that we're now in 48 minutes already. We're already way past the halftime. Now, when it comes to mods, CK3 has a really, really alive community. You come from mods, so you were working on a Game of Thrones. That's what got you into the job, basically, as you established earlier. Now this is a question that I'm gonna. It does come from chat, but I'm gonna expand on it a little bit. Yesterday. Was yesterday, right? No, 2 days ago, ethnicities and portraits and expanded release, which is this huge rework that, you know, the how people are generated. It's also a big thing when it comes to what assets are in the game. Then there's of course the community flavor pack. I mean, it's the most subscribed workshop mod because, you know, it doesn't take anything away. You don't have to consider, do I like this like total conversion, for example. It's just like it just adds things. How does that influence how Paradox approaches? I mean, Northern Lords had assets, right? But was primarily, I think, something that came in from a gameplay feature variant. How does the modding scene in general influence how the process of developing goes?
I mean, it influences a lot less than people will think. You know, like I know for like the CK2, like Holy Fury, there was like coronations and stuff for a feature, and people were like, oh, did you take these from mods? And it's like, no, we just wanted to do it. It's a historical thing, especially for the historical games. You know, there's only so much history you can pull ideas from. But it does give a good sense of an overview of what the community is kind of looking for, right? You know, the community immersion projects and portraits expanded things give us a good look of, okay, you know, people want more and more cool portrait stuff. So, you know, I don't know if any decision has been made from any of that info, but we already wanted to have more portrait things in all of our like DLCs and stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if it at least gives that confirmation of, yes, it's worth it. But otherwise, I mean, we look at mods, like, you know, a lot of us play with fun mods as well, because, you know, not everything we want from how we would like to play is something we're going to fit into the base game. But I at least usually I don't really look at mods so much for inspiration as more just like a general atmosphere. Like, you know, what are people liking? You know, if there's a trend where a bunch of features are getting disabled by mods because, you know, the wide community doesn't really like it, then that does give you pause for thought of like, oh, okay, maybe we should rethink this thing.
So you're confirming that Confederate partition is going out of the wind?
Well, more for what I'm thinking of is like some of the stuff from like CK2 when there was like the defensive packs, and, you know, Ruler Designer Unlocked is actually a really good example of one of those things. But for CK2, the Ruler Designer Unlocked was, I think, the most subscribed mod of pretty much all the time, because everyone was like, if I'm making my custom character and I already can't get achievements, what does it matter how overpowered I make them? So that was when we had the design for the CK3 Ruler Designer. We very much were like, okay, either we go for a point-based approach where you can make whatever you want and we just give you a cap for what allows achievements, or we would just, if we were going to go for the disallow achievements all the time approach, then we would have just had no cap or points. You could have just made whatever you want. And I think that's at least an example of where, you know, this is like, they're so far removed from each other by that point from the original CK2 Rule Designer, but at least of a thing where we definitely looked at it and went, okay, we have the data and all of us also agree with this design change.
Speaking of outsiders influencing the, or anything really, Paradox is one of the very few companies, I would say, where you can see, I mean, listen, I played a lot of other games, I've interacted with a lot of companies, and the only companies that would ever be willing to send somebody on that isn't a marketing person are basically indie games that is just one person. Because that's like the only sort of exposure that you can get there. But at the same time, how much does the actual community, I mean, you already say that you are more looking for moods rather than actual, like, precise feature implementation, because, you know, of course, again, features are very easy to come up with as an idea, but whether the implementation actually works is something entirely differently. But at the same time, how much do you look into the broader community? So not just the modders. I know, and you didn't mention it, I just want to bring it up. I know for modders, for example, that the co-op, the CK3 modding co-op has this big document that essentially reads, hello, Matthew and Magne, please, could you implement these things that we really want? So that is something very specific at that point. And I know that also actually was... I still hate that dev diary so much. Sorry, a bit of a tangent, but I hate the dev diary about the modding community so much, because, like, I didn't get much out of it. Nobody got much out of it, but the modders, I've never seen them that ecstatic. They were like, this is our moment. This is the time that we've been waiting for. But that aside, how much do you actually take the community, like the forums, for example, Reddit, right? How much does that go into decision making?
That is definitely, I would say, more, because that gives, like, you know, mods can give a little bit of a mood of a very small section of player base, because, you know, the amount of people that actually use mods is still fewer than the amount of people that don't. I mean, you know, we have our community ambassadors and community managers who give us regular sentiment reports on, you know, the feedback to our dev diaries, what are the hot topics on forums, Discord, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, what activities are they engaging with on Facebook to promote the game? You know, the weekly stuff on Twitter from CK3. You know, those different interactions, what generates community reach, what are people interested in, and we get loads of reports on that on like a weekly almost basis, I think, at this point, and that it doesn't necessarily impact a decision directly, because depending on where you are in the development cycle, most decisions are already made. You know, the chance of being able to undo, remove, or change wholesale a feature, unless is usually not super doable, but you can definitely tweak and balance things and know where you want to look at for a future patch. That's for sure.
All right.
So we definitely care a lot about that. I mean, the games live and die based off of the community, right? So I think always keeping them in mind is something that every team does.
I gotta say, the question, what does Matthew think about CK3 at adult mods? What do you think is going to be the answer to that question? I don't understand the merit of that. Okay, listen, I got a next question lined up already.
I mean, what do we think of them? I mean, they're not allowed on our platforms, and other than that, we try not to think of them. It's a case of like, people are gonna make the mods that they want to make, and
I love the. I gotta tell you, like, listen, man, no disrespect for like posting it, but I can't imagine myself typing these words out. I don't understand it. But anyway, listen, I got a
question to ask.
I got a last question that is basically not the last question, but I got the last question chained to the topic of feedback and game design. There is currently the open beta in multiplayer, and of course, I mean, that is a topic where, as much feedback as you can get is better, because it's multiplayer, and the more people play it, the more people run into issues. Is that something that just in general, as the systems get more complex because of a longer development cycle, and not that you would, be the one in a position to answer that, but for example, Victoria 3 has this really ominously worded part in their Discord description that reads, "Is there an open beta?" And the answer is, currently not. Make sure to keep track of our social media. Now, I'm not saying there's going to be an open beta, but reading that does make me wonder, what did they mean by this, right? So is that a concept that is maybe being applied more in the future, or is it something that is really specific for stuff like multiplayer?
So when we do open betas for things, it's very, very specific. I don't know what the Vicky 3 team is doing, but would I see there being an open beta Victoria 3? No, absolutely not. Closed betas, definitely. We have closed betas for all of our things all the time. But the thing with an open beta, especially for a game release, is that the amount of feedback you would have to get to then pick out the golden nuggets of what you want is going to be a logistical nightmare. Like, the reason when we do open betas, it's either for like pure fixes, like the multiplayer thing, where it's like, okay, we just want yes/no ratio of did it work, of which there's not a huge amount of extra feedback or differing opinions that are kind of come from that. It's either a step up or it's a step down, right? But when it comes to like actual feature feedback, having an open beta is not a silver bullet for getting rid of bad decisions either, because at the end of the day, you'll be biased by who takes part in your open beta. It's usually going to be your more hardcore fans, which is not necessarily means they have a wrong opinion, right? But if like we did an open beta for CK3 about some feature, then if we have more of the hardcore fans playing versus more of our wider audience, then it's going to be a biased result. And yeah, the amount of time you'd need to go through all the feedback and stuff is large. The only other open betas I know that we usually do is like, I know that Stellaris did one recently on like some pop rework stuff, where it was a bit of like a hot topic from the release of one of the patches, and they were like, okay, we're going to try this out and see what you guys as a community think, because that's something where, again, you don't need like, it's very targeted stuff is what I'm trying to say, basically, right? You can't, an open beta for pre-release CK3 would have been just too much stuff for people to look at and give opinions on for us to really ever act on it. So instead we have closed betas with a specific group of people that we invite and get feedback from. Sometimes we have open applications for that, and then we go through a big application sheet and give yes or no stamps based on various different categories. And also we very often, especially for the unreleased games, have user research tests, where that is people coming in, and it's more of a focus on the reception and the how do you feel playing this, as opposed to is like bug testing, because that's what open betas are more. They're, especially for pre-release, our beta testers are more about, yes, they give us that overview, but they also help us catch bugs. That's the whole point of it being a beta test. I think as well, also for games as well, people very much overestimate how fun playing your most anticipated game when it's a bit shit is, because that is what an open beta is. You're not playing CK3 like it is now. You're playing CK3 at its worst possible version, because it's buggy, not finished, and at worst has design changes you don't like that are in the process of being reworked. Like, I imagine that if I were to sit down and play the open beta of CK3, if I hadn't been working on it, I would have been like, wow, this kind of sucks. Because I mean, games find their fun a lot closer to release than people anticipate. Like, I mean, you obviously know you have fun systems and good ideas, otherwise you wouldn't be trying to do them. But the point where it all meshes together, when everything's in like a finished enough state, is not during like your alpha times, or it's like, once you've hit your beta is really when that comes around. Like, we said this a bit on like the CK3 Q&A panels, but yeah, like CK3 alpha version was not very fun. It worked ish mostly, but alpha is such an early key gate that you're not really expecting everything to be the most enjoyable version of itself yet.
I mean, I think anybody that has been in any sort of beta knows that I think like it goes hand in hand. I think the curve basically of people that appreciate QA goes up immediately and correlates directly to people that have been in a beta, because they see that it's not that much fun if you're actually gonna help out in playing the game.
That's the thing. Like, I always say, like, and this isn't to like target any like specific releases or whatever, but people like, oh, this release is crap, be it for like a CK3 patch or like a Stellaris patch, and they're like, why didn't QA catch this? And a lot of the time it's like, it's either a thing QA did catch but it wasn't prioritized to be fixed, or if you think that's bad, you should have seen what it would have been like actually with no QA, and then you would have cried.
There is actually a question in chat now. The Zoc is the adult mod question, and the Zoc is redeeming themselves, because this is also something that I wanted to dive in. Is there any feature that you would like or would have wanted to add to CK3 that just didn't really work out once it was implemented, or once you were implementing it? If you do not breach NDAs.
There's not been a large amount of features where it's like something that sucked so that we had to cut it. There's a lot of features where we had to iterate a lot. Like combat went through probably like 3 or so iterations, maybe even more, before we were like, okay, this is where we sort of want it to be in terms of engagement and the options you have. But I don't think there's nothing that really stands out pre-release as being something that was like, oh, okay, we worked on this a bunch and then we were just like, it's just not working, we've got to kill it. Usually, if it's the game overall, like, you might kill it. Like, I've worked on cancelled stuff before, right? Every game developer does. But that's usually not like a specific feature. That's like, okay, the whole product isn't gonna be what we want, and you find that out way earlier in the process.
Is this
But I
sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I was gonna steer a bit away. I was more going to steer into the failure, into the cancel topic, right? Because it's I think it essentially is a part of any sort of creative procedure. If you own a business that just sells things or that produces things, once you have what you want to produce, you are good to go. Like, that is what you do now, and now it's more an organizational thing. But in gaming, it's generally something else. Is that an issue when it comes to like developing things, like getting attached to features, for example, and then like to ideas, to concepts, and then saying, crap, that doesn't work?
It is definitely, it's like the the expression, like, got to kill your darling sometimes. It is hard, you have that feel where you're like, I have worked on this thing for weeks, months, for some other studios even years, and they end up having to cancel something. And it does definitely suck, but by and large, you also, at least for the ones I've been involved with, are like features where we've downscoped or delayed them until later. It's been like, oh, okay, it's stuff where I know that we're making the right choice. Does it hurt a little bit? Yeah, sure, but I think it's better to hold off and do something later than it is to do something is going to be a bit crap. No one wants to release something that isn't meeting their vision or the vision of the fans as well. Which I think is like, for all of the sins you can attribute to like Imperator, it's a game that learned that lesson like the hard way, right? It came out, and as Johan has admitted, the vision he had was very different to the vision that other people wanted, and it then, got passed over to Peter, and they did a lot of work on sort of changing that. And
He's on
same
Hoi
with
4 now, right?
yes, he's on
Yeah.
Hoi 4 now, I believe. And same with like Stellaris. There was a lot of features in Stellaris that got changed over the course of that development as well.
Wait a
But
minute,
it is definitely hard to take a look at some of your things and be like, okay, what I did doesn't work. But it's part and parcel of it. You've got to do it sometimes.
It's actually the Imperator thing is also interesting from a very different angle, because I personally, I'm a big fan of 2.0. I think the way it was is something where I look at it and I'm like, this really goes into my direction. I talked about this on my Discord. I mean, we talk about so many things on my Discord just in general as a community, but I specifically said that some games just aren't made for oneself, and Imperator at the start, and EU4 in particular. I mean, EU4 has this big community, but it's not for me. And Imperator pivoted into where it needed to go. But I also actually think that it might be an interesting topic to see whether a game that didn't make it in terms of reception, how people saw it, how people enjoyed it, whether that game can be recovered. Because Imperator certainly tried. And I'm not saying either way because I don't know, but I'll be real with you. When the announcement came that Imperator was discontinued, I was like, probably not gonna get picked up. Like, I know the what employees say is the opposite direction, but it's just like, after another year of like no content and already so few players, is it really gonna get picked up again though?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the concern there, right? Like, the only thing I have to like give that some vague level of hope is that we recently did that with Surviving Mars. It's a
That
project
is true.
that was
Oh,
that sort of
I
like
remember
stopped
this.
and was done, and then we got another studio to sort of make some more content for it. At the end of the day, like this is what they said in like the Imperator dev dies. The kind of fact of it is that Imperator never really recovered the player base after its launch. Even with all the great work of 2.0 and the amazing stuff the team did, it just never hit that level. Which is why I found it funny when people, some of the team said this as well. Everyone was like, "Oh, why did you cancel it?" And it's like, well, it got put on hold because people weren't playing
it sucks.
It's like the community gave us very clear numbers as to what you liked about it and what you didn't.
I get regular questions for that as well.
I don't know
Yeah.
about the long-term plans of it, of course, but I remain hopeful for Imperator. I mean, it's definitely not an impossibility. It's not going to be anything in the short term of the next like year or something, probably. But I mean, hopefully if we can find the right way to continue it forwards, we can. Because I know there is a very of the people that did play it, there's a lot of very, very passionate people about that project, including people that were on the team as well.
I get regular questions as well, what I think about it. I actually talked about it at length in a completely different stream where I was like essentially mirroring this. It pains me a lot because of how well I personally, or how much I liked Imperator 2.0, what it had become. But like at the same time, when I look at Steam charts, and I know Steam charts is not very accurate when it comes to all the other platforms because it's just Steam, then there's the Game Pass, etc. But in comparison to basically all other games, it's just like it just didn't get there, and that sucks. But at some point, you gotta cut your losses, and you gotta see where you can go from there. Now, I have a question from the chat, and I will make a reference that nobody will get, but I will find incredibly funny. So you have to take this in for a moment. Are there any? No, sorry, that's not the one. There we go. How is historical accuracy built into the game? Do you have historians as consultants? Now, many people don't know this, okay? But Paul Dupre, who works on Victoria 3 as the QA lead, may or may not actually have a degree in economics. Now, that's not CK3. I just wanted to bring that up. Nobody knows that. It's a very little known fact.
Very little known fact about Mr. Paul Dupree. So we don't have historians, like as consultants directly. We have, our content design team. Some of them have history degrees from what they've studied. But it's by no means a requirement to become a content designer. I didn't have a history degree. Being able to have an interest and do research is definitely an important skill. But the balance of historical accuracy is that it's important, but it's also not, a fun gameplay scenario will trump historical accuracy. Like things like I think the one that people come with is like Shield Maidens, of how, the dubious level of historical accuracy they are. To which the answer is, yeah, but it's really cool, so we're going to do it. We did make a very conscious decision with CK3 that we wanted to remove the more purely fantastical elements of CK2, like horse chancellors and Satan cults with actual magic. But we did still want to keep it, more historically based and inspired, but we're not going to have it be, either railroaded or losing out on really fun ideas just because of their questionable historical status.
Right. Let me just real quick. I'm trying to min-max in my head right now because I would really like to kill England in this stream. I would be very happy about that. So for historicity, I mean, there's always that debate. I mean, CK2 had a lot of mods as well, right? There was HIP, of course, the historical immersion project that really tried to like push much deeper into just saying, hey, even if it is detrimental to gameplay, and I love HIP, I want to stress that beforehand. I really love the idea of it, but HIP clearly also at some points had made decisions that essentially said, it doesn't really matter for gameplay, we want this to be historically accurate, and that is something that you say is essentially a mixed thing in the development of the regular game. Now, there is a question here about the roadmap. Oh, I already won. There's a question about the roadmap of CK3, but I don't think I need to forward that because there is like the big roadmap on the website as well. There was the first flavor pack, then there's going to be the Royal Code, which is currently the main object or objective of the team. And then whatever the other flavor pack is that was announced. Everything beyond that we don't know about. I don't think Matthew can say anything about that, so I'm gonna save you from breaching an NDA. Let me see.
I save you by the fact that, you know, we have a million different ideas. There's no shortage of that, but we're working in, you know, a very similar timeline. We're not, you know, we don't have like 3 or 4 expansions planned out because, you know, we're adapting to the changing circumstances of, you know, as I said, the community mood. What does it feel like people want, and what does it feel like the team wants? Because at the end of the day, we develop games that we want to play as well. So when we look at what is the next expansion we want to do, you know, it's our game director especially, but our just overall team looking at it and being like, you know, what do we want to improve upon?
Matthew, can I ask you to
change?
Stop cheating? By which I mean, would you consider to actively play the game with me by helping me against England? I don't think I missed together? That you were just chilling, okay? Like,
are we in a war together?
No, but I will call you in against England if you're up for it. I'm gonna eat the entirety of England.
I can help you out.
All right, let's do it. Let me see. Let's just do this real quick. We're gonna get back on topic real quick in a second. I just need to. I think did I call you in? What button did I just click there? No, there we go. I did not call you in. I just what was that? I just did something random then. I don't know what I did there. Okay.
There we go. Now I'm with you.
Let's move in. Let me see. What other questions do we have? If you got a question in chat, let me know. Ping me. That way I can see it. It's more likely that I'm gonna see it. Subjugate him? No, I'm gonna do a... Oh, subjugate Matt. See, the funny thing is that, like, since I'm a king and he's a player, the game constantly wants to tell me, you are able to vassalize Udrea.
You can try and vassalize and subjugate this man. Like, no, please, leave me alone.
Oh, I negotiated an alliance with someone. Well, lucky guy. Just randomly. I would like to go to war with England. Want to be friends? It's unrelated, but... Alright, let's just, let's get this done. This is very successful from my side if I'm able to basically trigger the Crusades immediately by taking Kent. Let me see here. What else we got? Right. One question that is not directly related. It's a bit of a filler question until chat comes up with certain things. Work from home. I mean, it's been a weird year, and it, you know, certainly is something that impacted Paradox. I know that very early on, like I think we're talking like February or March here, I saw the announcement on Twitter that it would be like phased into working from home. How does that impact game development? How does that impact you? And in particular, I also know, because I know far too many things about the company by basically this being my job, what happened to the social hours and whatnot, right? Because I know that like there's a lot of that.
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely impacted us like a decent amount, especially in terms of like, you know, communication. It's a whole different form of communication. You know, we had outsourced and stuff that worked remotely for us sometimes, but you know, they were the exception and by no means the rule. But with everybody being at home, needing to find these different ways of communicating and keeping up to date, it has been its own challenge. We're very fortunate that our jobs can be done fully from home, and that's something that we're very lucky to have. That, you know, I can not become unemployed during this pandemic. Was very nice. Big fan of that. But it does come with its own unique challenges. You know, like how do you balance the stand-ups, and especially as we continued hiring during the pandemic. You know, how do you get to know these new team members that you've literally never met in life? And yeah, as you mentioned, sort of like the social hours and like Tuesday beers and stuff that we
Tuesday beers
that was
during the week.
Paradox tradition. Well, you don't get rat-arsed, but that was tradition, heading out to the bar with a few people, talking design. It originally started, I think, as EU4 dev clashes used to be on a Tuesday, and they'd go out for a pint after that. But then it just sort of became a bit of a tradition. But yeah, all of those social hours and ways of team building It did hurt a lot. Like, I mean, like when I started work from home, I knew most people at Paradox, by and large, or like, whether I knew them deeply, but I could say like, oh, how are you? How are you doing? What's your team like? And that did lose a little bit of it. We've had people that have started and quit during work from home. It's been that long. But at least on the team level, we try and have some like team buildings where we do some more digital stuff. Because we are such a big team, we've had to have we've done like sub team building groups where you'll mix and match people into like a group of 10 and then you do it, because we have too many people to actually just do a full team building with everybody. It's because over like Discord or something, having like 50 people try and talk, not going to work particularly well.
Right.
But I mean, it's definitely been difficult, but I think it's also made a lot of us grateful for what we took for granted in the office before, of being able to see these people.
England up there.
Yeah, I'm coming.
Let's do a hot seat. I'm just going to throw questions at you. If you don't have an answer, then that's also fine. These all come from chat. Will there ever be a zone of control system for Warfare?
No idea.
Can you ask Matt if he can delete the entire island of Great Britain from the game? I think it could be a good idea.
How much are you gonna bribe me? That's the real question.
If you could pick between a Byzantine government pack or a nomadic government pack, which one would you choose?
Neither. Imperial generalized.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. That's okay. Let me see. Blah, blah, blah. How did you end up becoming one of the main public faces with CK3?
Honestly, lucked into that one. Really, that was never anything I had planned. I did a few streams for CK2 when we just wanted them, and we did like the underachievers and stuff. And then I did dev clashes and things. And for CK3, they were like, "Okay, you've got enough media training." And Rod was like, "Do you want to do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And then the live content team was like, we've caught one that likes to talk. We'll never let him go.
This is the new showcase for what a programmer needs to look like. They also need to be able to talk the entire time. Will we ever see game rules for cultural and dynastic names?
Maybe. If you have a good suggestion, put them on the forums.
I think Matt used to be a dev for CK2 a Game of Thrones. He was. I was just wondering if he's in any way connected to the current CK3 a Game of Thrones team.
Not at all. In fact, I don't even know who most of the people on that team are. I am very far removed from it.
Wait, what's happening? Why am I having a mental breakdown?
I had a bunch of mental breakdowns and then died. So
I don't want to become Catholic.
Nice.
Stop it. No. Okay. Let's see here. Where did the idea of creating 3D identity for CK3 come from? For example, the introduction of 3D portraits and now the introduction of 3D interaction throne rooms.
I mean, the 3D portraits was sort of the natural evolution after CK2. It's something we really wanted to have and was pretty much in the design from the get-go. For the 3D throne room, that came from our game director, Alex. That's just something he was really wanted. Yeah, Alexander Altner, especially with the whole... wanted to bring artifacts into things and being able to show them all off and show off your court. We have all these beautiful 3D models. We should show them all off and really give you that, what do you think of when you imagine a medieval king? You imagine their throne room. And that's really the drive there for the roleplay and the immersion that brings. Regarding
fantasy stuff, just what I want to be one, by the way. This is a good stream so far. Let's just pause the game. Look at this. This is where we need to be. Yet again, I show my skill in the game of Crusader Kings 3 against all odds. Now, there's a question here. That was stated very early on that CK3 didn't want to approach the world and the game experience with as big of a fantasy lens as CK2 at the end of the development did. Is that something that, I obviously there was never like we're never going to do that, but personally, is that something that you would like to look into? Is that a focus for you, or are you more interested in the more grounded stuff?
Torn. I really like a lot of the CK2 stuff, but it was very much when it was in the realm of plausible and would be explained by magic at the time. Some of the initial events of CK2, like, there's a hole in the earth. Like, it was, mystical-ish, but there are potential explanations that you just wouldn't know at the time. So I do like a lot of that content, but I also would part of me then think would be just better to have a fantasy game overall.
Would you like to make a fantasy game?
I would love to make a fantasy game. I mean, I got my shop started here by making a fantasy mod, so I would love a fantasy game. I think it'd be very fun. Depends a lot on the brand or making your own or using a different one, but I think it'd be pretty nice.
$150 Canadian for removing the entire island. I will inform you right now, 150 Canadian dollars are about, let's say, 20 euro.
Yeah, that's not a huge amount. Not worth it to get rid of the island, especially because I then get rid of my Easter egg character, so it's definitely not worth it.
I really like playing with flavor mods, and I was wondering if there was any plan for mods that don't affect gameplay to be included in Iron Man runs. This is a question that I get a lot, especially with EPN was not released recently. I know you said something about that at PDXCon, but I assume not everybody watched it. What is your take on that?
I mean, it's something that we do want to improve. It's just, again, it's one of those priority balancing things where the amount of mod users is not the highest amount compared to our time on anything else. It's for purely graphical things, it is checksum compatible, but if it has to modify like database files, then some of them are potentially mistakenly checksums. I don't know if the portrait stuff is, but if it is, then it probably doesn't need to be. But one of the common ones is like the UI, and the fact that is that as part of the new engine, we sort of like, I say new, Cosmos is constantly developing, but from around like 2016 for the starting of this sort of next generation of Paradox games, we had a lot of things we wanted, and a much better UI system was one, and we wanted it to be usable in mods too. So that kind of then comes with the downside that if it's not checksummed, you can load up a mod in multiplayer with a giant "Give me 5,000 gold" button and click that all the time, which is one of the things I was like considered looking into, but it would be quite a pain. Is having like soft checksumming, so you'll warn people in MP if you've got the mod turned on, but if the host trusts you with it, then it's fine. Mainly for external translation mods, if they're someone does like a translation into, I don't know, like Welsh or something, if they for some reason decided to do that, then it wouldn't need to change the checksum and block achievements or multiplayer if every other person wasn't using the Welsh mod. And I only picked Wales because I was looking at Wales on the map.
Yeah, why? I was about to ask why Wales. Like, what did Wales ever do? Okay, I gotta when it comes to that, I gotta tell you. That like I understand, I get the reasoning of why it's disabled, why you can't do achievements and whatnot, but like I gotta tell you, I would not have survived my 769 to 1453 and then 867 to 1453 and then 1066 to 1453 runs that I did for getting 100% in CK2 if not for the visual mods, because like at some point you just look at it so often and like it's just it kills you to a certain degree.
Yeah, you start to just gloss over what you're looking at.
Matt, if you got to choose about a flavor pack expansion, like because it's regional, right? So there's a certain region attached to it. Which one would you like to see?
That is a good question. I mean, I'm a sucker for some unique British Isles content. I always enjoy playing there, but I also think that sort of the Central Europe as well would be an interesting one. Stuff with internals of the Empire and France and the Eastern European regions could all be very cool ideas. I mean, really, pretty much everywhere is viable for a good flavor pack. Iberia is also a good one. The Byzantines, I don't think would make a good one.
You really don't like the Byzantines. I know this from before, way before even Royal Core was announced, so way before anything was announced, really. You already were saying people need to stop talking about the Byzantines. I'm like, you wanted to see roleplay.
The problem is that it's that people like talk about the Byzantines specifically and not just an idea of more wider imperial content, which I think would be cool. But having us spend a bajillion development hours just on one tag, it's not like it's EU where tags matter and persist. No one cares about tags in CK. It's the religions and cultures and flavors and characters that matter more. So I would like to see, some unique content for them, but like an entire flavor pack's worth, maybe not. And I think that also to do the Byzantines and the imperial governments of the time justice, you would need more than what a flavor pack is willing to add in terms of mechanics. Because the flavor packs are very content heavy, and if you really want to simulate like the internals of like the Holy Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, or like the other big
China eventually
empires in yeah, exactly, everywhere.
Oh, you can't say exactly to that. That's
exactly
China confirmed, by the way.
Or like the Abbasids and stuff like that, those bigger empire tier titles, it really needs more than just some events to do that. It needs a lot of mechanics.
I have a bit of a follow-up question, I guess, when it comes to the future of updating stuff. Wait, let me see whether I got another question here. Oh, actually, I got another question from Agamede. Agamede, we were actually talking about you just before the stream started about full screen barbershop. What a great Goddamn mod. Would you be okay if achievements weren't locked behind Iron Man? Is it necessary?
I mean, that's more of a question for, like our like game director. Personally, I don't really play for that many achievements. I don't really care. But I know that there's some people that, because at the end of the day, if you really want achievements, you will just use the Steam achievement unlocker hacks and stuff. I mean, if you really want them, but I think there is some virtue of there being, a challenge to it. If you really want to work around and save scum, you can. If you kill everything with like the task manager and stuff, it bypasses the game. But I think there is a virtue to it being some level of lockage. I know that people have considered, like, there was like a bronze man-ish for like CK2 at one point, with like some of the Monarch's Journey things. And I think that could be worthwhile. But I mean, personally, I don't really care. The only thing that makes me slightly more okay with it now is that the Iron Man system is a lot more stable than CK2's one.
Right.
So I mind it a lot less.
I just want to call back Zach, Uber Epic Zach. I mean, it's well-known modder, and this does not confirm a Byzantine expansion pack, just to clarify that. This is, there's no confirmations to be had on this stream, except the confirmation about the actual experience in the game industry itself. The rest is just asking a private person what they like and what they dislike.
I mean, I can tell you that if my choice of what expansion would do next, it wouldn't be Byzantines or Imperials. But thankfully for you, you don't have to care what I say. You have to beg off of our game director, who is, probably even less likely to listen to what you want if you just keep yelling Byzantine at him.
Did many people play the Monarch's Journey, and is that something that I mean, again, very private question. I gotta, like, I want to ask it because it was asked, right? But and I've basically gone through all the industry questions. But like, is that something that you would like to see again? Obviously, I can't ask you, can this happen for CK3 again, because that's definitely not something that you decide.
I mean, it could be, and I think it would be nice, but the thing is, it's also like, coming up with those challenges all the time. For Monarch's Journey, it was a very specific, like, let's not lie about it, was to keep engagement up of people until CK3 came out, right? That's clearly the purpose of those things. And that worked really well because it was such a specific timescale. We knew how many things we'd need. But for CK3 having like a weekly challenge type thing, we're not a live content game like Warframe or something where you have like updates weekly and it's very repeatable in small chunks. So I think it would be cool, but I think it would be how quickly would you run out of things versus just the community making their own cool challenges. Like, I know that there's plenty of like world conquesters like Ryuku or something in EU4. Those.
No, that's an actual achievement. You actually implemented.
It is an achievement now, but it started as like a community challenge type thing, and I think all those sorts of ones are like, it's good to come from the community as well as from us, and making their own challenges. But I mean, I think it would be cool. It's just the amount of time to come up with all those challenges from somebody. Somebody has to come up with them, right?
Right. Yeah. Somebody asked, I just want to like take that away. I think it's a good question, but not one that like really is for you. That's more for the forums. Is part of the dev team also working on improving some of the historical accuracy in terms of dynasties and realms, like the Burgundian house not being a cadet branch of the Robertine dynasty? And I know exactly what you would answer, and that is something for the forums, so that people that like are busy with that can take care of it. Let me see. If you I mean, you are the person. There's actually a question about the ruler designer here, right? If you were able. Or rather, would you rather, because, I mean, honestly, they just stick together. If you had the chance, I know royal court, etc., but like, you made the ruler designer in CK3, and at the time it was stated that coat of arms are not something that is doable without random generation at the moment. Can we hope that at some point somebody's gonna enslave you and you're gonna get back to the topic again?
Will it happen in the future? Probably yes. When? No idea. It's as you sort of said, the reason we didn't do it is because it wasn't super trivial. The coat of arms system was sort of built from the ground up for CK3 a lot, with the idea of it random generation being the thing it's going to be best at, and it was not really thought of having like a full coat of arms designer was needed. It's doable with the system, but it's not the first go-to thing. But I mean, I think I would definitely like to work on it as well, and I think it would be a great addition, especially as we're showing the coat of arms in more and more places.
Yeah, right. It will probably become more important as well. I mean, obviously it's going to be in royal court. Like that's clearly what you're getting at there with. Is like the banners, I'm sure, will probably like bear some resemblance of that. Now here's a great question. Thoughts on the Royal Court DLC, Matt?
I mean, I'm pretty excited for it. I mean, as long as I don't, it doesn't. I'm hoping it doesn't kill me during the process of making it, but I'm very excited for it to come out. It's a lot of cool features and a lot of very cool work. Especially the 3D scene stuff is really looking. I mean, obviously you've only seen a little bit from the dev diaries, but
We've seen a single
we've been-
screenshot. Ever.
Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing there.
I get to see it on a daily basis right now, and it's very cool. And seeing all the stuff our artists are doing and all of the code work we're doing on it, it's definitely very fun. So I'm very excited for it. Especially also excited for the culture rework as well. It's been a really good stuff done by Magna. Been very nice.
The culture rework is like I could not like. It's nice. I love roleplay and I love making this game basically The Sims. It's what I wanted like from the start. That's where I wanted to go. You know, I had this period once CK3 came very close where I still had to make CK2 content, and every time I had to sit down to record a video, I still did Let's Plays back in the day. I was like, God damn it, another day of just like using all the arcadey mechanics that I know from like, you know, like the back of my hand. And I was like, CK3 like really hit it for me in that spot where I was like, I really want this more character focused thing. But the culture rework, I really hope like that is the first time that culture can ever do those things. I'm very excited for that. But we're coming towards the end. Let me see. Maybe one more question if I find a good one. Not a meme question. There's some questions here I want to say for chat. Not bad questions, but not really questions I think Matthew can answer in particular, because it's stuff like, can this be done in the game? And the answer is, I think a forum post, you know, communicating to the broader dev team, there's the better choice. Please do use the energy from being here in the stream, from wanting to ask questions, to submit stuff. I forced my Discord today to submit a bug report for the open beta, because without that, we're not going to get it fixed, because people need the feedback. But with that all being said, thank you for coming on. It was very exciting for me to basically talk about, in particular, just the game industry behind the scenes, you know, everything where it's like, hey, how did you get there? What do you do? And how was your experience? And I also appreciated that you took the fielded questions that were more related directly to the CK3 work that you're doing. I hope you enjoyed yourself, Matt. And
absolutely, it's been a lot of fun. I always enjoy getting to talk about CK3, and I love the initiative of trying to dispel some of the myths and rumors around the game industry and make it a little bit more transparent. Because of all of the like digital entertainment industries, it's very secretive. Despite being also now the most profitable one, you know, the most globally, it's still like very, you know, low down knowledge of what goes on in making a game at all.
Yeah, I mean, nobody lets the non-marketing people out of the cage. It just does not. It just doesn't happen. I've talked to a bunch of companies. It just doesn't work that way. But in this case, it worked. And with that, I want to just say thank you for coming on. Let me see whether I can just real quick. I gotta configure my scenes here. Gotta be real quick about it. There we go. Beautiful. Let's do a transition to the end screen. Thank you all for being here, for watching, for hopefully having fun, for hopefully, you know, having maybe gain an interest, maybe gain a bit more insight about the games industry. I hope to be doing this not always with Matt. It was great, Matt, but I gotta find other people as well. Quite soon, I think. Next week, Sunday, is what I'm aiming for another one of these, but in a different role, because Matt, of course, comes from the having been a modder, having been a content designer, and then having been a programmer for the last years. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you, Matt, for being here. And with that, I think that's all from us.